So, Sean, if you want to give us oh, we already are. Okay. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The time is now 6:33. I'm Chairman Mike Curry, and I'd like to call this Board of Selectmen workshop to order on this first day of April 2020. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America
and to the republic
for
which it
which
stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. Just by way of roll call, I'm going to go around. For those who are not projecting video, the live stream, people may not know that you're attending, so I'm going to go through a roll call real quick. I've got Jeff Bennett, Mike Curry, Carter Terenzini, Terry Griffiths, Adam LaMontagne. We have representatives from TCTV who are assisting us with the live stream and the documentation, or I'm sorry, the presentation this evening. We have Holly Young, Tony DeJoy, Dr. Kazavant, Amy Guthrie, Scott Dill, and Diane Haley, and I'm not sure, PGALE, PGL. I don't know who that is, but they're on.
Pat Gale from
Pat Gale,
Cultural.
Okay. Before we begin, I'd like to state for the record that not only are we being streamed live on YouTube web platform, but that this entire proceeding this evening, except any executive sessions, this is a workshop, so there will not be any, are being recorded for both TCTV, Cable Station 8, and later viewing on the TCTV YouTube channel. As always, our agenda for this evening has been set no later than 48 hours out by law and is publicly available at the official source for town information, templetonma.gov. I'd like to point out, since the governor has placed Massachusetts in a state of emergency, open meeting law has been suspended as we know it and has been allowed for flexibility for public meetings. Understanding this, we will make every effort to post meetings, hold them publicly, maximize board participation, and have mechanisms for interaction, and always have recordings or transcripts available for the public's inspection. I would also like to remind all the citizens of our 4 villages to sign up or register for emergency updates using the Code Red system. It is on the left-hand or center of the screen near the bottom. You may also text from your smartphone the keyword Templeton MA to 99411. Although I have the discretion as chairperson to add and remove from the agenda, it has been set to allow for time, personnel resources, and public awareness. I reserve the right to move agenda items around to best fit our business and guests. Thank you. Tonight, I believe this is the 4th meeting that we've streamed on YouTube. We've made every effort for anyone with business before the board to give access to this application. This application is called Zoom. Many people are using this platform to include our school district, and it has worked out very well for us. Before we proceed with tonight's agenda, a couple rules of the road for Zoom. Please use video when possible. Please use the mute feature when not speaking. Although TCTV and I can place any or all on mute, it is easier if you control your own mute button. If you wish to see materials shared in the screen, please request that of the chair. You can email. I think I've got everything that we need for this evening. This will help everyone stay synchronized and be helpful to the viewing public. Right now, only the chair and TCTV are able to share contents or screens. If you wish to speak, you may raise your hand. You can use the raise hand function, which is also called reactions in Zoom, or you can politely break in if you are on telephone. Viewers of the live stream may ask questions that may be acknowledged by the chair or any other member that may be monitoring the YouTube live stream chat area. Okay, we got that taken care of. Our first item this evening is Dr. Kazavant and the NRSD FY 21 budget. Dr. Kazavant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee. And first off, I want to thank the entire committee for your indulgence. We've had to postpone a couple times for a couple different reasons. The last, of course, was that there was a new number to be recertified, and I wanted to make sure that I came before you, with, in essence, the school committee's wish, or certainly its vote as we move forward. So, I thank you. I think that the budget process this year has, given what took place last year and just your typical budget, just the budget routine, it almost seemed like it never ended, and it never really does. But let me just say right from the start that what was different, quite frankly, from, let's say, December to February, was the amount of communication that I believe that the school, the district, and the town had. It was first off, it was more timely. It was, more, and we had a better understanding moving forward than I think that this is my fourth year, but in the last 3 years anyway. And so I think that in creating this budget, it certainly helped quite a bit as we were moving forward. And so I need to acknowledge that, because whatever positives come out of this, I point personally to that fact, probably beyond all others. And I think a lot of lessons were learned last year, and we don't need to rehash all that, but certainly it's not lost on myself. So moving forward to FY21, as it probably does not come as a surprise, the same issues were, from my standpoint, were there. Just simply moving from calendar year 19 to 20 didn't change anything. The budget, as we know, and it's been widely publicized that, with the whole Student Opportunity Act and the monies, it did not, at least this go around, did not avail Narragansett Regional to any extraordinary relief or money for that matter. And certainly we'll get into that when we go over the income sheet. But moving forward, it still presented the same issue. Again, I say from my perspective that the district was just not financially stable enough to have two K through 5 elementary schools. It just wasn't fiscally sound. So moving forward, when we started these discussions, when we had as far back as January and February, truly we developed really two models in the beginning. One was with no ads, just as it was, level serviced, and we were, that PowerPoint back several months ago, when it was like a $20 million budget, and it was we just literally stopped budgeting at that point in time. We stopped the budget process. It just wasn't feasible. And I certainly think that the committee certainly realized that. So we had to think in a different way. So what did we do? We started to think about, well, if you relocate all of the elementary students from Phillipston to Templeton, just doing that on its face wasn't doable, because there were far too many kids that you could not put that many kids into one building. It would have been, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, something to that effect. It was just unmanageable. So we started to look at that. Okay, if you move the 5th grade back up to the middle school, what does that do? Well, it solved the problem at the elementary. The PowerPoint that I had sent along, and I most certainly will send it again, projected that, in essence, that the TES would stay in terms of kids roughly the same. The middle school and the high school complex have seen huge numbers over the past years. We knew that was doable, but the problem became that we couldn't maintain the schedule. We couldn't rotate the schedule. We would have needed to actually literally, in essence, cut teachers in one area and add them to the middle school / high school just for the schedule to work. That became problematic, obviously, and it just wasn't, obviously was not in line with what we were trying to do. So In short, what we did is we started to discuss the possibility of moving the 8th grade under the umbrella of the high school. Now, if you think about that, just as what I've said, it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference, the same amount of kids, but it's about the schedule. When you move the 8th grade under the high school, you assign them basically to the high school, those teachers do not have lunch or common plan or go on prep at the same time like they do at the elementary. What they do is they do so by department. So the next thing you know, you have your English teacher, of the 8th grade say will be off when all the other English teachers are. That's great programmatically, but I will tell you what it did. It allowed the schedule to work a lot easier, thus not needing us to hire more people just to make the schedule work. We already share staff across middle and high school. So once we mechanically figured out, and again, if I'm going too fast or if I'm saying something that you've never heard before, because we've, certainly have talked about it quite a bit, please, I don't know how to do this, but raise hand or wave or do something, and I will certainly stop. But when we did this, we found that we could mechanically make the schedule work. Once we mechanically found that we could make the schedule work, once we found out that that the number of students in Templeton Elementary would not exceed, that we could actually physically fit them into the building. We then knew that we had at least mechanically a viable, at least an option. So what does that actually do though? What that does is that, again, we've heard this quite a bit. You've heard me say this quite a bit. In this district, we have 5 teachers at K through 5, right? So there's 1 teacher K through 5 down at Phillipston, and there are 4 K through 5 teachers at Templeton Elementary. What we will do when we reassign is we'll take 5 classrooms of students and fold them into 4 teachers. So we are cutting 5, well, right off the bat, right? A kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and 4th grade right off the bat. So right off the bat, that's step 1 in a sense. Okay. The 5th grade has to stay at 5 teachers because there are so many kids at the 5th grade level. All right. So, but in any sense, that is one of the ways that we were able to maneuver or to start looking to get to a certain point that was palatable and doable for Templeton and Phillipston. The downside to this, quite frankly, is that the class sizes will be, or again, projected, because I don't know how many people will move into the district, say over the summer, but they are right now anywhere between 28 and 29. So 29, 29, 28, 28, and 29 in that order from K to 4th grade. That's a lot. But I will tell you that, I want to make sure I say this appropriately, that the town spoke about how they felt about that through the 3 grueling district-wide meetings that we went through in November, December, or whatever the case was. The simple fact of the matter is that that's what needs to happen. Now, if 10 kids move into the 3rd grade that happen to be in the 3rd grade, or to that, then we're going to have to think of something. We have to think of something, I guess. But right now, 28, 29, 29, or whatever, however breaks down, although projected, because that is just simply assuming that every child we have here today will be here again, opening of school in September, and no one will move in or move out. I guess you could look at it both ways. In order to make this happen, we obviously will not, from my recommendation, we cannot take any school choice kids from grades K to 8 at all. Those numbers are too high. We really honestly couldn't take a 1, and certainly at any of those elementary levels. I get, because you just heard about the class sizes. I'm not knowingly going to put class sizes over 30, or willingly, I should say. And so right there, what that does, of course, is it eliminates 4 positions. We've also identified 2 other positions as well. So for a grand total of 6 teaching positions, an administrative position, a secretary position, and a part-time custodian. Now, that's devastating, right? And I know that people don't like to hear, this type of conversation. It's never easy to have them, of course. But I have to say to you, though, the benefits to the district are as follows. And these are needed benefits, by the way, folks. It adds that second nurse back to Templeton Elementary School. That is vital. It just, I don't know what anyone's experience is, and I'm being serious about this K through 4 or 5, but that is a lot of action in those nurses, and it's those nursing, and one nurse with 400 or 500 kids. It's just not. First off, it isn't safe, but it isn't doable. But that allows us to do that. It adds an additional custodian to Templeton Elementary School. Look, there are a lot of bodies in that building. Templeton has paid a lot of money for that school. The issue is that we want to keep it up. And the way to do that, of course, is with preventive maintenance or good maintenance and cleaning. That's important. It adds a middle school unified arts teacher. I'm going to go back to that schedule. When we first did this schedule and we thought, well, we'll just move the 5th grade up, and then we'll just do it that way like we always have. Because we have so many kids now, we became cognizant that we might have to add, as I said, like 4 bodies just to make those schedules work. Well, of course, that doesn't make any sense because you're trying to, again, cut in order to reach a certain, or to reduce your budget. But we do need to add 1 middle school unified arts teacher, which actually is a benefit because it will be a Spanish teacher, which we need in order to really satisfy a lot of requirements, but we'll be able to add AP Spanish for those kids who are focused in foreign language, and that's a big deal, certainly for accreditation, but for offerings. The middle school will be less dependent on the high school. That should be something that everyone should be happy about, because how this is, again, my perspective, but the way this originally was set up, the middle high school, and I'd said this last year and the year before, as kids either came, or if the numbers increased any, the only way that you could very well respond to that would be to add people, because the high school had to share its staff with the middle school for mostly unified arts, okay? And well, that's, first off, if I'm teaching 5 or 6 classes and I'm a high school teacher, but 2 or 3 of them are focused, or they're now assigned to the middle school, well, that's less than I can have at the high school to offer. And now all of a sudden I might have these huge numbers of kids who need to take a certain class, and my only option is to hire another I just saw this this cycle of just we were not scheduled, we're aligned correctly, we just were not designed right. And so by doing this, it'll help us in the long run, and it'll allow us to offer more courses to our high school kids. Provides equitable services for elementary students. You guys probably are sick and tired of hearing me talk about guidance counselors and school psychologists, and at the earlier levels. Folks, I need to address that, because that is where we can make probably the largest impact on kids. And by the way, as I've said, just tongue in cheek, if you're not worried about that so much, then if you're worried about saving money, then guess what? That will, because we're trying to teach kids a lot of different things. Some of it is just about control, about impulse control. And sometimes if we, these are sometimes the kids who have to be outplaced for a while, which costs tens of thousands of dollars, not even tens. I wish it was just tens of thousands of dollars sometimes. But we feel that we have the type of staff. We just need some of the services to help keep our kids in district. That's what we're trying to do. And we want to do it because they're our kids. It's important for them to stay in this community. And we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to add that, and again, of the last 3 years, I've said we definitely need a school psychologist at the elementary level, at the earliest level. Well, we're going to be able to do that and still hit this number. it still supports and continues our academic growth. I don't believe that we have given up or just given in to this idea that as we cut all of these, and it's unfortunate, but I don't believe that we're going to, suffer academically. We have really good teachers, and we're very lucky to have very good teachers. Yes, 28, 29 are a lot. It's manageable though. If it gets up over 30, 31, 30, then we're going to have to figure something out. Okay, but I'm not really looking to, to say that here tonight as oh, this is definitely going to happen. I don't know that it's going to happen. If they stay exactly the same amount, number right now, then I think that we'll be in good state. Ultimately, if you were to say to anyone that, the budget was only the total general fund income was only going to go up 1.18%, people are asking, how do you do it? Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to, reassign an entire elementary level of children into another building or buildings, plural. This won't happen again, folks. There is no other building. I just say this openly, right? Because it's important. It's important to say this, that there is no other, major move to make this happen, to keep, say, the increase year over year this low. Do I know what it is going to be next year? No, I'm just concentrating on this year, for gosh sakes, or next FY, pardon me. But I have to say that, yes, I do not want to lose staff, right? I don't, but I feel, and have said on several occasions that I feel that we are still as strong academically that we were, prior. And by doing this shift probably should have happened quite a few years ago. You already know I feel that way anyway. Matter of fact, beyond me, it should have happened probably 4 years ago, 5 years. I mean, pick a year. I don't know. We just didn't have the facility to do it. But I think this will be one of the bigger moves that any district can make. But I think in the end, it'll benefit on a lot of levels. So I guess I'll just stop right there, because I've just, given a whole bunch of information, but that's where we're at.
Thanks, Dr. Casavant. Did you, I can bring up that document. If you basically gave the narrative for what that document's going to show. Do you want to go through that? Do you want to take any questions right now?
It's completely up to you, but I will tell you, it's definitely a pared down version than you have seen in the past, meaning from the past presentations. But I will do whatever you would like. I'm at your disposal.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Diane.
I think the public would like to see that document.
Okay. It's
posted on our website. I just want to make sure that all of our presentations are posted to the.
I'm sure that it is, but
okay.
A different subset of people watch these presentations compared to your presentations, just so that it gets out everywhere.
Sure. Absolutely.
All right, Dr. Casavant, the file that was sent to me was the Narragansett Regional School District income sheet for FY 2021.
Yep.
And just to orient everybody, it's got FY 20, the columns for FY 20, FY 21, a plus and minus change, and then a percentage change. And this was at the top. It was approved March 25th.
Yes. So as you can see, in which we've pointed out over and over again, and and I don't lament the state enough, probably, but I mean, so when you look at the Chapter 70 increase of $39,000, that's really only coming because we got that $30 per child that came up to $39,000 roughly, give or take. 39,120. Pardon me. I mean, so as you look, I mean, we could look down the list. You do not see a huge plus or minus in terms of the monies that the state basically are responsible for. And as you can see, one of the bigger hits that we took, but we kind of unfortunately forecasted this, is the $100,000 less Medicaid. Again, you do your best to project. We talked about projecting a lot last budget cycle, and this is what we projected. It obviously didn't come to fruition. And of course that that becomes an issue. And so, as bleak as it looks right there, of course, I mean, we are in the same boat as a lot of small regional districts, quite frankly, who are held harmless. That is the issue. We are not receiving the type of monies that we should, is because we're still, we're still considered held harmless. We're receiving more money than we have children, by the formula. I've explained this over and over again, right? But they still, they still, in fact, hold us accountable for those monies, and that has a lot to do with the lack of funds that we received, well, almost every year, but certainly Chapter 70 this year. You get to the Templeton contribution. I think those are really straightforward. The additional appropriation, 140,000, thank you. The minimum contribution went up 38. The transportation differential is $47,000, which, overall that was actually pretty low. I was pretty happy to see that ultimately. And of course, the number, the 227.70. And, people say, well, the question came to me at one point, do you create a budget to hit a number? And I think that the answer to that is, well, yes and no, right? Yes, you have to hit a number for both towns in this case, right? But you also need to provide the services you need to provide. I think that at this time, we did provide the services, but I want to quickly talk about school choice, because one of our alliterations of our budget was, again, we need to become less dependent on school choice. I've been saying that over and over again. The first number that was certified by the school committee had a number of teachers, 3 teachers coming out of school choice, right? Because we don't want to be as dependent on fixed costs. We've talked about that a lot. In order to make the magic happen here, quite frankly, and to hit this number, we had to put those 3 back into school choice. That's a dangerous, again, it's a dangerous exercise. And, we year over year preliminarily are about the same amount of kids last year to this year of school choice in. The big difference this year is we have less children leaving school choice. And of course, that's a big deal. So the number is never solidified until June. It's a preliminary number, but last year we had 155 students school choicing out, and this year we only, we had 122. That's a big drop, right? And that's, again, it's to the staff and the students. The teaching and the staff members who work here. So that's good. And so, but again, we are trying actively to be less dependent on school choice, and that is a major push for us. We have to get those fixed costs out the best way we can.
Dr. Cassavant,
Yes.
based on the numbers in your classrooms, you can't really rely on school choice anymore.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you can't, if numbers are that big and you're not accepting school choice, how can you rely on that?
Well, remember, that's last year's number, right? So we're always a year in the rear.
Right.
So the fact is that you're right, we can't rely on it. So we're trying to take these fixed costs out and bring into the general fund as best as we can. Yes.
Right. So if you're relying on school choice in, like when you had relied on that last year, that's not a good idea this year.
In order to hit this number, we needed to put those 3, we are relying on school choice. Let me be clear about that. We are, right? We spend roughly $1.4 million, in school choice on fixed costs, right? So yes, we are definitely relying on school choice. We're trying to slowly, or as quickly as we can, I guess is the best way to put it, to become less reliant. And if we have to do it, 3 staff at a time or X amount of thousands of dollars of insurance at a time, that's what we're going to try to do. So as our numbers go down, school choice in, that we're able to make sure that, that's a, it's a softer landing, so to speak. It's not going to be a giant drop at some point.
Well, I think that's prudent on your part.
Well, we're trying. Yeah. So we couldn't do it this year, right? But again, we're not lamenting, I'm just saying that the first number that we did, in fact, did, have two just coming out. In order to hit this number, it wasn't feasible. Okay, so we'll give it a shot next year, for lack of a better word, but that's an important piece to, to put out there.
This is Tony DeJoy. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm trying to do some simple math, and math on live stream is probably not a good thing. But let me see if I can get this right. By closing Phillips, then you're saving X. Let's just use $1 million based on what I was told the operating costs were. So to me, that 19.5 number goes down to 18.5 right away. What's brought it back up to the 19? Mike, if you could go up a little bit on the document. What brings it back up to the 19.7? A little bit, go up a little, or down a little bit now, to the 19.729. So you're saving money by closing the school. How does your budget increase?
Cost of living. I mean, you're talking about 2% to teachers in FY21. You have a 6% or something to that effect. Am I on? Oh, good. I thought it was me.
Yeah, you are.
Health insurance was 6.5%, or whatever it was at this point in time. I don't have that right. The TC insurance. I mean, there are costs that are just going to that are always going to go. Your budget is always going to go up at some point, or your costs are definitely going to go up, whether it be cost of living or otherwise. And it isn't just like it's a static number, and we were able to reduce it by $1 million. So now again, I have to go back in time. A level service budget, meaning 2 operating K-5 elementary schools and the staff that we had, was a budget around $21 million, and I'm rounding. So that was just to keep everything just the same. So we knew that that was not a number that was palatable, to put it nicely. So we again, the rest of the story. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the district it only takes 19.5 or whatever to run this district. That's why we do, school choice is $1 million, right? So that's not even on the general side, right? That's on school choice. I mean, yeah, from the school choice side of things. So I mean, to operate this district as is like around $21 million.
Okay. No, it's just because I think people are going to ask that, where you're closing a school and saving money, but
no, yeah,
that money you save is absorbed in other ways.
We're not saving money. Well, okay. Here's a number. You gave us a number. Well, because I'm just talking to Templeton right now. You gave us a number, right? So you basically hit this number. Well, okay, that's not saving, that's cutting. So in other words, if level service is basically baseline, and it is, right? And it's going to cost $20 to $21 million for baseline. And someone says, well, look, we don't have that. We only got this much. Well, then you have to cut your base, right? You have to find ways to make that number. And so I think that was always the problem last year, is that people say, well, the state says it only takes you to do X, Y, and it only takes you this much, the minimum required, whatever. Well, the state has also said that this formula is defunct, doesn't work. And that's why they've put how much money behind the Student Opportunities Act to hopefully to get everybody back up to what the number it does cost. Because again, we could go into this conversation all night, is that they never ever factored in for special education increases. They never factored in the increase for insurances, et cetera. The formula was broken. The required minimum is not enough to actually operate the school just based on that alone, on those 2 factors alone. And it isn't Casavan saying that. That's what the state said. I mean, they have, obviously finally changed the way that they're thinking. We just have not been the recipient yet of the type of funds that they're looking to put to schools.
Right. Okay, thanks very much. I just, like I said, I think that would have been a question, and I just wanted you to be able to clear that up.
Sure.
I'm not questioning it. I pretty much know why.
That's a fair question. Yep.
Dr. Casavan, we've got a couple of online questions. I'll filter out, and if they've become overcome by events, we can skip over them, or you can say that you previously discussed it. First question is, school choice, is it still going to be voted by the district, and at what grade levels?
So it's the school committee by statute needs to do two things, right? One, vote if they're going to take any, whether they're going to be a school choice accepting school or not. Okay. And that is that, are they even going to consider school choice? That's a yes or no, or, an aye or a nay, right? So once that happens, believe it's next month, it's scheduled for next month. So if they do say, yes, we are going to be an accepting school choice school, most certainly what they can do and have done, we've done it every year since I've been here, is pinpoint the grade levels in which could handle that. And that's what most districts do. For us, and I'm not saying that this is going to, I've already said out loud that K through 8, there's just no room. Does that mean that 9 through 12, that'll be something for the committee to look at, but they can designate a grade or a range of grades.
Okay, and follow up from this, this is from Julie Farrell, in the interest of making sure that we are live streaming, but if it's the same as if someone came to our table and had to basically say what their name and address was.
Okay.
Follow-up question, how does Phillipston transportation decrease if all of their students will be attending school in Templeton?
Are we talking about are we talking about from the income sheet, or?
I believe so. The question came after we showed the income sheet.
By student population. So, if, again, I can't scroll, but if you scroll down to the bottom of the sheet, oh, yep, right there. You see Phillipston enrollment drop by, 6 more kids or whatever the case is. So, again, proportionate, it dropped by, I think, yeah, $2,500. We still have to pick up, well, how many kids we have living, it's the same buses. It's just less kids to transport who are different drop off.
Great, thank you. I believe that the YouTube user is Bob May. I think I've determined that in a previous question. He asked, why do you assume a 2% raise and 6% increase in healthcare should be eaten by the taxpayer because you don't manage budgeting in advance?
Well, I'm not assuming anything. That's what was bargained by the school committee, first off, with the 2% for the, I guess I'm not sure quite to answer this, other than to say that insurance is what it is. We get told that the increase of 2% was bargained, which quite frankly is fair. They have not received 2% in the last, 7, 8 years. I don't know how many years ago it was. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
We deal with the
Right.
same things on the town side as well.
Sure.
It becomes a question of, why and who gets it. So I certainly get it.
Yeah.
Now, Amy Guthrie, you're on the line. Do you feel that your question concerning school choice was answered? All right, hear nothing. Dr. Casbit, we'll move on. Does anyone have any questions from the board? Carter, do you have any points to make along the way?
Well, I want to go back to Tony's question for a moment. Yes, the building was closed, but those 120 plus or minus children came to Templeton. And the class sizes are such that you couldn't just simply absorb them into other classes. So there's a certain number of teachers that came with them. So the $1 million to operate Phillipston was a gross number.
Yeah, not net.
We've warned everyone for some time that it would not necessarily be a net number. With respect to one position that was in Phillipston, I personally encouraged the superintendent to make sure that that position was preserved and was put at Templeton Elementary School. That's a 38 plus or minus $1 million building, and we thought that that was important to maintain that property to the highest possible standard to help preserve that investment. Transportation, you can see, was up by $100,000 by itself. The state continues to fail to meet its commitment that it made to all of the communities when it did that. And then there's some things that come with the new elementary school. The insurance on Baldwinville, and I don't know how much on Phillipston, was probably less than $10,000 a year, whereas the insurance on Templeton Elementary School is approximately $38,000 a year. So I think that when we talk with people about what happened with the $1 million at Phillipston, we do need to remember that was a gross number and not a net number. And there were a few changes that occurred that we actually thought were important to preserving the capital investment in the building. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention.
Thanks, Carter.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I thought Chris answered my question. I kind of got what he was saying.
If there are no further questions, just last call for questions. And Dr. Casavan, I know that Bob May's got some questions about ethics of giving raises during budget shortfalls and otherwise. I think that's more of a question for the school committee board, but I did want to bring it up as he has mentioned it in the chat area, if anyone's following along with that.
Okay.
Yep. Dr. Casavan, thank you for presenting tonight. I very much appreciate it.
No, it was my pleasure, and I wish under other circumstances we could do so in, not like this. It could be in person. I just want to say also, just real quick, while I've got the floor just for a second, is that the folks of Templeton obviously are fantastic, and they've been very accommodating to us. We've been working hard to get them their meals, right? Our kids, and I want to say to both towns. But over the past 2.5 weeks, we've made and delivered over 1,500 meals to kids. And, I have to say just a great deal of thanks to our food service folks and the volunteers. We've had a lot of volunteers help us do that as well. And, I just want to take a moment to really thank them, and actually the folks of both towns, but just being patient with us as we try to figure out, building this plane as we fly it. So I want to say a great deal of thanks to them.
I agree, Chris. It's been, on behalf of the school district, on the school district side, to watch all of the commitment and sacrifice and, a lot of happy faces. You made it happen. I know on the town side, we're very happy with the food pantry and the amount of volunteers and donations that we've got. This is definitely a come together situation, and we're realizing that. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Yes, Diane.
I just wanted to say to Dr. Casavan, I want to thank you and the school committee for the time and attention that you put into the budget this year. And I know that all these decisions could not have been easy, and that there are jobs lost, and great value in all the teachers that have been there for so long. And I really appreciate everything that you've done for everyone.
Well, thank you. I'll pass that along to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Casavan. We're moving along in our agenda for this evening. Next up is our FY21 budget review, basically some follow-up items from our budget meeting that we held this last Saturday on March 28th. Carter or Adam, are you taking this? And if you need any documents brought up, please let me know.
I'll take this. We've sent out the answer to the few questions that we had. I think at this point, and let me, if I can, circle back to a discussion I had with you earlier today, Mr. Chairman. We must schedule the town meeting for May 13th. It is highly unlikely that we will hit that. We have begun to think that it is much more likely that we can get to a town meeting on June 17th. Now that remains to be seen, but Dr. Cassavant, from his perspective, the staff, I think we all want to do everything that we can to avoid a 1/12 budget. With a May 17th meeting, May 13th, excuse me, normally in the normal course of events, this board would have been due to deliver the warrant to the advisory committee next Wednesday. It's due April 10. We've warned you that given the current events, the manner in which we're operating, that we might have to blow past that April 10th. We need to think in terms of asking the select board to vote on this on April 22, which would still give substantial time to the advisory committee to have its full consideration and its pre-town meeting. Almost 60 days between April 22 and June 17. So we'll be asking for their indulgence on that. That said, we still have to get a final budget and a final warrant. And I guess at this point, the question is, are there changes to the budget that the select board wishes to make in buttoning up the numbers that go into the warrant?
Well, it being a workshop, obviously that is a open question to the board. I know that we're discussing some things this evening from a workshop perspective. We went through the budget on Saturday, and I certainly did nothing other than understanding the disallows. Some of the disallows, I know that Diane had drawn attention to them, whether they were 20,000 or 30,000, but in relative view of what those budget line items, so 1.2 budget item, it represented a percentage. So I did not have any inclination to make any amendments to the budget unless it was to correct an error, but certainly no major implications.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Diane.
I was just, those numbers for the police department and the ambulance department were just, I was just pointing them out, and they were large. I went through the book again, and, there's really nowhere that we can, in my opinion, take them from. I know what Jeff is going to point out today, and I read through my whole packet, and I don't feel that we should be taking any more money out of the ambulance receipt reserve, and that is only my opinion. There's nothing we're voting on tonight. I don't have any changes to make to the book.
Okay.
I felt it was well put together, and I felt that the department heads did their job, and that's my feeling on it. It was just a matter of pointing it out.
Yep. And I understand what you're saying. I want to make sure, it's a workshop, but I want to give Jeff his full, I want to make sure that he's
I do too.
Yep. I want to make sure he's able to present it, almost like it was a hearing. I'd like him to be able to propose everything, and then we can wind up either agreeing, or we go through all the different items that we either agree or disagree on. But
I agree with that.
Okay. On budget items, Carter, I agree with you on the timing. I think that the advisory committee still gets full control and full consideration of all the documents that we're going to send them, you know, the release of the warrant and the budget to them for consideration and discussion. I think as we go through this COVID emergency crisis, every day it changes. Just when we think it's going to, you know, this curve is going to flatten or otherwise, either numbers change, we push dates out. So I agree with you. I think that we've got to be conservative in going forward planning. That's in light of our bylaws, and it's also in light of the law and the changes to law that the legislature and the governor have given us flexibility on.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Tony, go ahead.
Okay, from an advisory committee's perspective, we understand the situation, obviously. Until you change the meeting, technically you need to give us the warrant by the 10th. I think we could go a long ways if you could get us a draft warrant with the anticipation that and the likelihood that the meeting is going to change. I think this way, normally a draft warrant at this point is 85, 90%. And then, so if we don't change the meeting and we get it around the 22nd, like Carter said, we've at least had a chance to look at it and would really be just looking at those changes. Unless you're going to officially change the town meeting date, you know, in the next week.
Mike, if I might.
Yeah, please. I thought you might.
So the warrant, Tony, in the budget book of February 27 has had one amendment to it since that date. That was the addition of a citizen petition. And pending what I hear tonight, we should be able to have a draft to you in the next few days as it goes off to town council and keep you posted along the way.
That would be great.
So I think that would meet your concern.
Yeah, I think it would. No, that's just what I'm trying to do. And then I'll discuss it at our meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that'll work out good.
Okay. Carter, do you want me to bring up any of the answers to the question? I think that was in the legislative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that unless there's, you know, something that the board wanted to change or dive deeper into, we've pretty much answered everything. I do want to make it clear that this is not a vote tonight. There's still some time. The thing is that if there are changes the board absolutely knows it wants to make, we would make that in the draft warrant that we send off to council and to the advisory committee. On the revenue side of the house, most of our numbers at the local level are in pretty decent shape, even pending a potential downturn. So for instance, all things being equal, we've already collected the 42,000 in meals tax that we carry in the budget. We've already billed and will collect more excise tax. So the question becomes, House One, will that be different? And frankly, we're not going to know that at the town meeting. We may have to true something up in the fall. I would hope not. But if there are additions that folks want to make to the budget by increasing revenues, I really don't think we're in a position to do that. And the only real addition back into the budget that I saw from the various questions was Jeff's thoughts on restoring some of the lump sum disallows by an additional draw from the ambulance reserve. Other than that, I think we're on track. I haven't heard anything different.
Okay, thank you, Carter. I know we've also had some, there's been some back and forth singular emails about any kind of possibilities of overrides. Right now, our draft warrant does not include any. Do we include, whether it by any discussion tonight or by anything that may be in front of us right now, do we expect any kind of override article?
From my perspective, I do not. We've laid out to you one modest, one thin dime for the state election in 2020. That's just beginning to be talked about to provide more robust resources to fire, health department, and emergency management. We're actually in very good shape by comparison to a number of communities, but I do think if we had the resources, we could provide a more robust response. Other overrides for the future, we've laid those out in another memorandum, but we have nothing planned that we expect to request you folks to consider at this point in time.
Thank you, Carter. All right, on this agenda item, does anyone else have any other questions? Any other discussion items? All right, we're going to move on to the referrals from our March 25th business meeting. The first one is the request for ambulance receipts amendment article for the town meeting warrant. Jeff, would you like to give that presentation and any document that you may wish to have everybody look at the same time and have streamed, just let me know.
Yes. Regarding ambulance receipts, my thought is first, and did everyone get the proposed amendment of town meeting vote of the town meeting vote of 2011?
I did.
Okay, I sent it to all selectmen. I hope I've been really busy with some stuff.
Everyone's looking at it, right?
Okay, so basically what my proposed amendment would, and which would not take effect until the budget year of 2022, which would start in next December, January 2021, because I would not want to do it on the fly real quick. I've done something like voted on something in the past like that, and it doesn't work well. And basically, as you can see, from a very, and I cannot remember, that's going back too many years from my brain box, and I couldn't find the documentation on how the motion changed or was different from the warrant article. And I would propose to put in front of town meeting to amend that very short, not really concise motion from 2011 to more specific spending of the ambulance receipts fund for ambulance and or fire department equipment and gear, medical supplies, and even capital items such as the much needed dryer. I mean, Chief Dickey's on Saturday said he has a washer, but they're line drying basically their gear, which increases turnaround time. And as you noted that we have been using the ambulance receipts to back up the general fund budget. Again, I know what the motion says from 2011, but I also know what the warrant article was, And I believe the intent of town meeting, and this is open for interpretation, I would suppose. But I don't believe it was the intent of town meeting to use it to back up the general fund. And for a few years, it was a separate town meeting article to transfer money in 2013, 14, 15, to transfer from the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation to help operate the ambulance service. And then when you get to 2017, which would have been for fiscal 18, we started the town, the Board of Selectmen approving it in the budget, transferring funds from ambulance receipts. And those are the separate articles back in 13, 14, and 15. And you can even see there was a lease payment made out of ambulance receipts. It didn't come from taxation. It takes a little pressure off taxation dollars, which without an override only goes up at 2.5%. So those are the articles prior to 2017 that were specific, from the ambulance receipts to the ambulance service. The fire department, we made an ambulance lease payment out of ambulance receipts. And then in 2017, we began transferring money out of the ambulance receipts to prop up the general fund. And there is no way that anyone can say that ambulance receipts transferred to support the general fund is going specifically to the ambulance service. And that's how it started in May of 17 for fiscal 18, 225, and then it's to 250. And 2020, which would have been to 59, we added another 20,000 for the school, increased budget that we had to do. And for fiscal 21 now is proposed to do 270,000. I mean, what's next year? 300? And there's a note there, as you can see, that there was an override of $470,000, and of that, 290,740 was specifically for the fire EMS. If we need to continue to support the general fund budget with ambulance receipts or other funds, then clearly we have a general fund budget that is outpacing our tax revenue, our local receipts, and our state aid. Because it seems like we're grabbing every penny and we can. And we're taking capital items out of taxation. The ambulance, lease payments, and the fire truck, which I know Carter sent out the memo that showed the totals. If you took them out of ambulance receipts versus taxation. And as Diane noted earlier, there's also, I believe it's about $63,000 or so of disallows for this year, the fiscal 21 budget. Included in that disallows are firefighter gear, medical supplies, medical equipment. At this point in time, and I know the budget was done before this happened, this Corona thing you were going through. But I don't believe this is the end of it. It's going to come around again. This is like the second Corona thing that we've had. The first one was SARS. It didn't get quite this big, but so my first proposal would be, again, to put an article in front of town meeting and let town meeting decide if they wish to amend their vote from 2011 and more specifically align the ambulance receipts for appropriation for spending to the ambulance service and fire department. And is it going to be easy? No, you're becoming dependent on this money from ambulance receipts to fund the general fund. And whenever you have to back off of that, it gets a little hard, I know. There was an ambulance receipts fund in the town in the past. It was discontinued for whatever reason back in the day. And they were just going into the general fund as local receipts. And when we created the ambulance receipts, there was a lot of talk that, wow, you're going to take this money out of the general fund budget. What are you going to do? It's hard the first year or two, but then you get used to budgeting without that extra cushion. And again, you also offset some of the taxation dollars being spent for ambulance lease and the fire engine. Right now, I looked at looking at the monthly expenditure reports for ambulance receipts. I looked at the quarter, the third quarter back in 2017. And then I looked at this year, roughly the same time frame. That was March in 17, and this is, and this is now, I'm looking at February. But there was about $277,000 left after a transfer. Even in 19, it's roughly the same. And this year, we're at about 305, 315-ish. So we're not, this thing that, well, we can keep taking the 250, 270 out and we're going to slowly build up. We're really not going anywhere by continuing to take out that 250, 270 out of ambulance receipts. It's, and yeah, that shows 305, and that's for February. And I believe the memo Carter sent out that, they've made some ambulance runs and so forth. But we're really kind of just staying even. It's to buy an ambulance outright. You're going to be a lot, and to have any money left in it by continually supporting the general fund with ambulance receipts. So, and I know I did mention Saturday that I thought we could take care of some of the disallows by a transfer, a separate article with a transfer out of ambulance receipts to be spent for ambulance service, fire department by the chief. I think the most important thing obvious one would be a dryer, so they would not be hanging up and their gear would be cleaned and dried in a more expeditious manner. But my number one request is to put this in front of town meeting and let town meeting decide, do they want to amend their original vote and what this will do? I mean, what the result is concerning the general fund budget. They want to keep using ambulance receipts to back up the general fund budget, or do they want to amend it so it would be more specific to support the ambulance service fire department? And that is a question for the board to whether they want to put this article in front of town meeting or not.
Board member comments?
Yes. Jeff, I've done a lot of research on I know how the articles have changed from year to year and how in the very beginning it was supposed to be just reserved for capital, and then how it changed over. And I like you don't know how it changed over, or like Carter, but I think that Chief Dickey has a handle on how he's doing things, and it changed up to 270 because they needed that amount. And although I'm not thrilled with the lump sum disallow, he has a handle on his department, and I think that it's up to us to support our department heads and to know what they're doing, and for it to go the way it's been going. I think that we could, maybe they have to be able to control their department, and we have to support them in doing so. I mean, to just have, perhaps we could, cinch up some of the language, but to not just have town hall, town meeting, be all over the map, and just transferring out money that, town meeting says so. I think that what, Chief Dickey is doing along with Carter, or at the town administrator, whoever, the successor, decide is what needs to happen. And it's been going along well, and that them saving money for a capital expense so as to not have taxation is the way that it should be, so that we don't have to come before the town and need a debt exclusion, for a fire apparatus or an ambulance, and we just have to take the lease payment out of there, and maybe not having a lease payment the town would be happy about that. When we first started the ambulance receipt reserve, we didn't put money in it in the beginning, and it all went into the general fund, and it got spent. So it was done totally wrong. And then for the 4 years that, there were 4 years that we didn't get audited. There was, instead of money for ambulance receipts, it was being spent by the fire department. It was being spent, I went through lots of receipts, and I had my hands all over that department, and it was a mess. So being able to compare, any year beyond the last 2 years since Chief Dickey has had his hands in it, is you're not going to really be able to get accurate numbers, because they weren't accurate at all. They were not accurate at all. So you can't really go by that. I think Chief Dickey has a handle on it now and is doing a very good job. So I think maybe cinching up the language to, I think they are getting somewhere, because there's money in there being saved now for our next purchase. We just got a fire engine, so however many years it takes to get a new fire engine, I honestly, off the top of my head, don't remember how long that will be, and however long you have to get a new ambulance, I think they will be saving money. And I think that they will, have some money in there, and maybe we wouldn't have to use so much in taxation. So I think that he's doing a good job. He's doing the right job.
Off the top of my head, Diane, I believe the fire engine is a 6-year lease.
Okay, thank you.
About 93,000 a year, I believe.
So
I would have to double check that, but it's not that long.
okay, and I think the last time I looked, there was $315,000 in there. So he's doing a good job saving.
Right,
And only
but
taking what he needs.
Thanks, Diane. Terry, go ahead.
So what I hear Jeff saying is that it would be a little bit of stress on the town over a couple of years to readjust. But what I hear Selectwoman Haley saying is the chief has already done that. He's doing a good job with what he has, and he's managing to save. So he's already adjusted to not having that money. So why change it? So I agree with Diane. If he's adjusted his thinking and his budget and he's comfortable, because I really felt horrible with this coronavirus that he didn't even have a dryer, but I don't want to make a decision based on the stress that I feel for him and his staff, in this situation. But if he's comfortable with it and he's made the adjustment already, then we don't need to upset the apple cart again, is my opinion. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Yes. Diane, Terry, you both spoke. I'll go ahead and speak up, and then I'll open it up to anyone else that's on Zoom this evening. So I think that you're on to something when you talk about what the intent was for what that article was designed to do. It does make sense to me. This community achieved ALS, and ambulance receipts just did not meet the measure for what the expectation was. And I think that's where it went wrong. I don't think it was the language of whatever article it was. And I'm not in favor of going back and changing an old article. I'm always in favor of moving forward. We have good ideas and we can affect things, then let's do that. I can see on the chat for this evening's, there was a question on why wouldn't we just, from Julie Farrell, she said, why wouldn't we just create a stabilization fund, or move, if rather than changing old articles, why wouldn't we move forward by creating something else? Another thing that I looked at, aside from a very tumultuous ALS service that is that our community struggles to continually fund at an appropriate level. I'm just going to mute you guys so I don't get any feedback. I look at it is from does it meet the test of purpose, legality, and feasibility? Legally, I think it like I said, I think it is a good idea. I think that if you're getting ambulance receipts, that it should be like an enterprise fund. It should go back into funding that. But what we've created is something a little bit more difficult to manage. So legally, it may meet the test. Feasibility, it doesn't meet the test for me. Not right now. You know, if in a moment, if Carter's going to go through the issues that he had with it, one of the items that I'll make sure I put up on the screen is we are on a path to making sure that it works for us. Again, the original purpose might have been clouded in that article, but I think from a feasibility standpoint, we're getting to the point where we are actually able to operate our ALS in the way that we've kind of got the intricacies going with it. I wouldn't support going to this town meeting to put it to the voters for something that we're still kind of going through. And I certainly wouldn't support changing, you know, if it had different language, kind of like Diane was talking about, if it had different language for how we were going about utilizing the ambulance receipts, I'd understand a little bit more, but I just don't feel like going back to try and amend an article from however many years ago. That's just, I mean, again, this is a workshop. I want to be able to talk through these things because everyone's got a pretty good position. We just have to talk through this. Over. Any more discussion?
Mike, you're saying create something new, or is that from Julie Farrell?
Well, no. So Julie in the chat, she had mentioned, why don't you create another fund? Why don't you create something rather than change something that was already done? Which kind of, that would make sense to me if that was the right way to move forward. Using the ambulance receipts right now, the way that we've got it set up between the TA and Chief Dickey, they're good with that. They understand that it's been kind of, you know, I try and take a look at Jeff's approach to it, whether it's to do something that is going to benefit and provide capability to the fire department, or are we just changing something that created the problem years ago, and by doing that, you know, will by virtue change that capability. I'd rather get through the bumps that we're going through right now. And then if we're able to tweak it to make it work optimally, where ambulance receipts do fund fire department stuff and not anything else, and not anything else that we'd be relying on, I think we can get there. I just don't think it's the right time for it.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Diane.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
So those funds, although they're in the general fund, they are moved to a different fund so that they are kept track of. Only for the ambulance department?
Is
And the
that a
fire
question? Who
No,
can
it's a
best
statement.
answer her question?
Carter,
So when the ambulance receipts come in, they are placed in a segregated fund that is reserved for appropriation. They cannot be used unless the town meeting authorizes a transfer for them. So I don't want to belabor my memo at length, but there are just a couple of quick illustrations I'd like to touch upon. You were doing exactly this upon the adoption of the article. The difference was your costs were relatively low. You were using on-call personnel. And you were budgeting in fiscal 17, $300,000. Now in fiscal 16, you budgeted $300,000. You were actually budgeting more than you had on hand. And because of the state of your books, people really just didn't understand it and know it. By fiscal 17, you had changed completely how you were managing the ambulance, and it came with another package of costs that were contained in another department, insurance and benefits. And so the decision was made to stay consistent with the fact that they needed to be appropriated out. And regrettably, we did end up at 270 in fiscal 20 and 270 for fiscal 21. But you are still expending less ambulance receipts in fiscal 20 and fiscal 21 than you expended in fiscal 16. That has allowed the balance in the account going into the fiscal 17 budget. You only had $175,000 in deposit at the time that you wanted to make the appropriation. Actually, it was about $150,000. Today, when you go to make your appropriation, you have about $315,000. So the fund is increasing. It's creating that if you will, reserve for future capital and the like. So it's working. It's doing what we had intended. It's quite manageable. And the major difference between reserve for appropriation and a stabilization fund are two. The first is that a reserve for appropriation is exactly that. It's simply sitting there. You know you're going to spend it virtually every year, and it's a 51% vote of the meeting to appropriate it. A stabilization fund is intended for longer term, far less cyclical withdrawals, capital projects, dramatic economic downturns for your operations. And it requires a 2/3 vote for withdrawal, a much tougher bar to get over if you're planning to annually use this to pay for capital and medical. And at the end of the day, the bottom line is, however you decide to proceed, you will have to cut your operating budget. There will be a spread. That spread depends upon what you decide to try to pay out of this fund. Today, we've estimated that it's in the memorandum. So it's doing what the vote was for. It's building up a reserve. We're actually using less of it today than we did in fiscal 16. The fire chief is supportive of the current method of administration. And we would ask that you continue to implement this strategy until such time as it proves to go wrong. And at this point, the only way it could go wrong would be if a select board or a town meeting appropriated more that can truly be justified. Bear in mind that it costs about $900,000 exclusive of the 2 leases to operate your fire and EMS. And fire and EMS is approximately 75% of that costs. I'm not sure what more I can add other than to add those few numbers and those side-by-side comparisons. I think the memo lays out the staff position fairly well.
Anything else?
Just to double check, I just want to make sure Chief Dickey still feels the same way, even in the current situation. with COVID.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I think that the chief would always advocate for more for his department. And in fact, he needs more, which is why I've laid out this idea of perhaps a one thin dime in the fall to address some of those needs. But I think on balance, the chief is very comfortable with the manner in which we deploy the reserve. He's told this board and previous boards that initially he wasn't so sure. He just wasn't completely comfortable. But once he saw the full timers come on and their benefits being in other departments and having to maintain time tracking and the challenges there, he was very supportive of this. I think he would also tell you that while his department does need deeper capital investments, he is pleased with the progress that has been made in meeting the capital needs of his department. Could we always do more? Of course, for all the departments. But when one looks at the investments that have been made in fire and EMS over the past 3 years, the new ambulance, the new fire engine, the striker units last year, the proposed replacement over the next 3 years of $225,000 of the SCBA, not the tanks, but the masks, the regulators, the smoke discharge systems. And the chief has become more adept at learning what the grant agencies are seeking. So I think that on balance, Terry, he would tell you that while he could always use more, that he is pleased with the way things are headed.
Thank you, Carter. Just further discussion is changing, what we do in the Board of Selectmen is we set policy. I certainly didn't come on to get elected to try and fix everything that was done poorly in the past. I was fairly confident within the last few years that much work had been done by the Board of Selectmen to try and fix those things. But it wasn't, hey, I'm going to get elected and I'm going to clean up this crummy town. It was, I'm going to get elected and do my part and see what we can do moving forward. So I'd rather policy our way out of this by coming up with some of the good things that Jeff proposed within it. It does seem to me that that is an appropriate use. I don't know what happened in 13, 11, or 17 for what people thought. All we have is what was voted on. So rather than put Band-Aids on the past, I'd rather have good policy moving forward. Terry, you had something?
I do.
Please, Diane, go ahead.
I think that Jeff's language is almost there. I think that we should just clean up that language and, you know, make it be how we really do things.
Okay. Do you need any other? I mean, this was Jeff bringing it to workshop. Does anyone need any other information, or Jeff, do you think that people need any kind of clarification? Because the next time that we bring this up will be on our business meeting, April 8th. And Jeff, you're on mute. I'm not sure if you have anything else.
Other than a possible citizens petition, no, I have nothing else.
I thought that you might say that. You know, I thought that you may take any which way I'm gonna get this to the floor. And I know that there's been other people that have been vocal about why don't we just let the townspeople figure that out? That is 100% valid. I understand, you know, but where are the conduits to that? Where are the conduits to make sure that things are balanced? We could put a million different things on the warrant. It may not be the right time or otherwise, but I kind of thought that you would take that approach. And I don't know what to say to that. I mean, Diane just said, let's clean up the language otherwise. I just think policy-wise, I think we're getting there. But even from the TA and the fire chief's view on it, it doesn't seem like it's ready yet. And I just don't think going back to try and change what we thought town meeting wanted to do 5-10 years ago isn't going to be in the best interest of the current community, how the current situation is. But I understand what you're saying, that, you know, there are different ways to be able to get something to the town meeting floor. Thank you.
I'm still here. I'm just, I had to X out of my frame because of the static. But so what I hear you say, Mike, is, and Diane, is it still possible to move this recommendation forward for annual town meeting in a different manner?
No, well, let me, I can answer that. So I said to Jeff, based on our discussion, and I think it was good discussion, that we were going to talk about this on our next meeting, which is a business meeting, so a voting meeting on April 8th. And Jeff agreed with me, and he said it wouldn't matter whether we're going to talk about it that night or through a citizen's petition. So to answer your question, Terry, basically Jeff's saying whether we vote to bring this to town meeting floor or it winds up becoming a citizen petition, either forwarded by Jeff or somebody else that feels that we need to amend the past to get the ambulance receipts correct. That's what Jeff was saying. I hope I'm not mischaracterizing you, Jeff.
Okay, I was waiting for Jeff to comment to see if his response to what you said. So again, it seems like if we go forward with it, it's going to upset the apple cart where we have a trajectory in place that's working. It doesn't seem like we need to, you know, again, try something different just now.
From a fundamentalist point of view, I think Jeff is right. I think that the people that he has that can speak to it, I think from a fundamentalist point of view, it is the right thing to do. But right now, it's not how things are occurring. We actually have some success the way that it's working right now. I don't, our capital items that we have to forward to them, it's why should we have to wash it through free cash where everyone else doesn't spend money, or we're not spending it all? Why should we wait for capital items for the fire department when they have a source of revenue? I think that we could get there, but I don't think that we're here right now.
This might sound kind of harsh, but it's because I'm new. So is it up to the Board of Selectmen to tell the fire department this is how it's going to be? Or is it up to us to, morally, conscientiously make the right choice to protect them? Like, as a board, what is our obligation?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I think that we should be supporting our department heads, and the chief feels that he can move forward with, and the warrant article is currently written as to how we can proceed.
Yep. So to answer your question, Terry, we set policy, but it's our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, recommendation that we do not amend to change that ambulance receipt structure the way it exists now. If I'm Carter, if you need to speak up, you're on mute. Raise your hand. I can unmute you.
It is our recommendation of the fire chief and myself that this not be amended. Now, that's the staff position. Our job is to lay out all the reasons of why we don't think something should happen or why we think something should happen. If it is the desire of the board to make some changes, I'm hearing from even those that think maybe this should be explored further, that it's not ready for prime time. And I'm not sure it can be ready for prime time for this annual town meeting. So normally coming out of a workshop, if something is ripe for action, and that's the phrase that we've normally used, it's reported out, maybe some minor changes, and the board votes on it. If it's not ripe for action, then it's held in workshop normally to make those changes and to be reviewed on a couple of other occasions. So these do not, in the normal course of events, go automatically onto the agenda. So I would first need to know, if you think this ready for prime time, we'll put it on the agenda. If you think it needs more work, it would be held here in workshop for that. The fire chief and I could try to work with Mr. Bennett to get the language into a slightly better shape for everyone to look at. Bottom line is, I want everybody to understand, you will most likely have to cut your general fund budget if you make the proposed change, and you could lose the buildup of cash as has been projected. As long as everyone clearly understands that, we just need to know the sense of direction coming out of tonight's meeting.
It's not ready for prime time.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm not going to force this, and it doesn't seem like anybody on the board wants to push it forward. And everybody is comfortable with cutting the budget for medical supply and fire equipment and so forth. So I wouldn't even put this on the agenda for any other meetings for this fiscal year, if it was my call. I don't see the
I, Jeff, would like to, I think you have some great points, and I think that we need to change language to be reflective of what we really do.
All right, then let's move on to the Road Stabilization Fund article request. Jeff, is there anything you want me to bring up on the screen, or do you just want to present? And I can kind of glean what you're talking about, and I can throw it up on the screen like I did before.
If you want to throw the memo up from the town administrator, you can. My proposal was to simply put in front of town meeting to see if they want to create a special purpose stabilization fund to begin putting money aside to bolster up the little bit of money that we get from Chapter 90, that is the gas tax money. The governor harps on it that since he's been in office, they've gave over $1 billion. But other than 1 year, I think it was 2015, they gave 300 million. They've been doing 200 million for the past 5-6 years or so. And by the Templeton gets the little bit, and Bob Sozak has been doing a good job of putting Band-Aids on a lot of roads. There's only so many roads that don't have any steel in them, and that would be drainage for starters. And as Orchard Lane has showed its ugly head, and I believe Baker Lane will eventually reel its head too. It was paved, but underneath the water mains, the drainage and stuff was not touched. That cost a lot of money. We can keep praying on, the state to come through, but realistically, the only ones who are going to put the money forth in some way, shape, or form is the town to try to build up funds to get one road at a time done correctly. The water department is going to have to start, have a capital plan of some type. But for the town, the basic place to start, and it affects everybody. Everybody drives down the roads. Not everybody regularly calls the police officer or the fire department, ambulance service, or anything like that. The roads affect everybody. The highway department, they go down, they plow these roads. If you have a nice smooth road, you plow it, you use less salt. You have less ice build up, less hard pack. You spend less money hot patching, cold patching. All that little stuff that they do, putting cold patch on top of cold patch on top of cold patch, like some of these roads have, you're just wasting money. So I proposed, or I would propose that the board put in front of town meeting, whether you want to do it this year, this annual town meeting, or a special town meeting in the fall, to create a road stabilization fund for roads and drains. And yes, it's a majority vote to put money into it, and it's a 2/3 vote to take it out. I am not proposing an override, special or otherwise, to fund it at this point in time. One, I don't think it would pass. And two, with all this Corona junk going on, I think some people are gonna be hard pressed to pay their friggin' taxes and their rent as it is. It's my belief possible if it goes in front of the annual, there could be a little bit of free cash rather than let that roll into the next year. Put some, whatever the amount may be, $10,000 or so to start this stabilization fund off. There is a thing that is a special special override that the town would vote X amount of dollars, and from there on, it just automatically goes into that stabilization fund each year by a vote of the Board of Selectmen. And just say it was $250,000. The board could vote to put the whole 250 or 200. And once all your roads are done, which, you know, is gonna probably be a while, then that override goes away. It's the one override that can go away. I believe it's 3 years has to pass first, but I'm not proposing any override or anything like that at this point in time. It's just to see if the town wishes to create a special stabilization fund for a specific cause, roads and drains, and then perhaps fund it. My first thought is a little bit of free cash that was otherwise roll into the next fiscal year, and we lose access to it until such time as the DOR certifies it again. I think it's pretty simple. I sent everybody, I believe everybody should have got it, a paragraph out of informational guidelines from Division of Local Services, and I believe I gave you the number so you could look it up and read the whole text. I wish at some point in time, hopefully it's sooner rather than later, we get back to real meetings where we're in person and I could just hand this stuff out. But that was my pitch for this road stabilization fund. You know, people talk about the roads all the time, and no, Templeton by no means is the only ones with terrible roads. There are bad roads throughout the state. Again, just like school transportation for regional districts, the state doesn't give nearly as much money as they need. I believe the number is $650 million a year just to keep the roads in decent condition, in good condition. And that's why I requested to have this, bring this forward to see what the board felt about it. But I was not asking for a special override, especially at this point in time. And if I had requested a special, I would withdraw it because people aren't going to vote for it. They can't afford, you know, it's going to be a tough year, just paying taxes and rent and all the other stuff with what's going on.
Jeff.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, hang on one sec, Diane. Jeff, the
Oh,
document that you were referring to, I did find it in email. Everyone who's on Zoom can see it pretty much right away. We are a little bit of lag on YouTube, so it takes a few seconds for it to come up, but I believe that's the document that you were talking about. Let's start out. I'm going to leave that one up there for a few minutes. Diane, please go ahead.
Jeff, I didn't get an email, so I have no idea what everyone is referring to. So if you could resend that to me, I would appreciate it. I did get emails on the ambulance receipt, but I didn't get that email.
I will send that out to you as
Okay.
soon as this meeting is done, Diane. I apologize. I swear I
Okay.
had your name on there, but
I didn't get it. I didn't get anything. I just got stuff on ambulance receipt. But did I hear you say that some Chapter 90 monies would come?
no, what I referred to it as Chapter 90 money. This special stabilization fund is the town would put some
Oh,
money away each year
okay.
to use in addition to the Chapter 90 money, because the Chapter 90 money that we get, I mean, we're using a chunk of it to do the engineering costs for Royalston Road.
Mm,
We used a chunk
right.
of it And it's been the practice of the town because it's the only real place where we've had money to take from, and it's 4 roads. So, you know, as long as we're not buying equipment with it, it makes sense to do that. But the little bit that we get is never gonna, I mean,
Right.
you know, Bob Sozak's doing a hell of a job putting Band-Aids on the roads with what little he has. But
So would you want some of this money to come from free cash?
well, that's my first idea of to initially put some money in it. And eventually maybe if we use free cash to fund it, we would have to revisit the financial management policy. And the only place really to make an adjustment there would be the 50% working capital. If you reduce that to 40 and then take 10% like we do for the capital stabilization fund. That was just my first, you know, thought right off the top of my head,
Mhm.
to get some money put into it after it's created. But my first request or thing to put in front of town meeting is to, if they want to create this fund to start with.
Right. I just feel like, you know, overrides at this point, especially with this hard year, may be a difficult one.
I'm not asking for an override, and I wouldn't.
Not this year. You just want to create the account.
I just want to start the fund, and if we want to fund it or you know, put some
Mhm.
money in it, look at whatever free cash that we have left whenever we have a town meeting, whenever that happens to be, if it's in May, June, or July, whenever that happens to be.
Mhm.
And not take, you know, a ton of it, but like I said, off the top of my head would be about 10 grand, just to put it in there to start, and then figure it out. It doesn't have to be jammed on the annual town meeting. I just thought I would try to get the conversation going, get information so all members of the board can look at it. And
Mhm.
maybe it's more appropriate to do it at the fall special town meeting, but I don't know what the board feels like if I don't ask the question.
I don't disagree with the road stabilization fund. I just think, I mean, maybe creating an account would be a good idea, but I think the ways and means to fund it, because we would have to change our financial policy. Maybe the ways and means to fund it, we would have to take a longer conversation. I don't know. I mean, I think creating the account is a good idea. I think that our roads are a mess and we need millions of dollars to fix them. And that is a conversation like we really haven't had. I mean, we've have the book and we've created some of that, but I mean, I think, I think it's a good conversation to have. Those are
Terry,
my thoughts.
Yep, thank you, Diane. Terry, anything before I speak?
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
I agree with Jeff. I commend him. He's doing a hell of a job, to coin his phrase. He's doing a hell of a job brainstorming for the people, and I respect that. And I'm new, so I'm not sure how to proceed, but if there is some amount of money, I like the conversation to fix our roads. That would certainly be a priority with me.
So I think that Jeff has been innovative. I think he's got a long list of things that we can change, some things that he's quite passionate about. But I think that working on the roads, we know from our road study that it is going to be very difficult given the current Chapter 90 that we get. So I think this is an innovative way to be able to fund a sustainable road strategy, replacement strategy, fixing or otherwise. I took some notes here and I'm reading it. It says it makes sense to be, obviously not through a road override. But Jeff, have we thought, I know that I've mentioned this and when you had brought it up in previous meetings, rather than relying on override or otherwise, but are we able to come up with some kind of recommendation for a percentage of receipts? If we take a look at excise that comes into the town, are we able to take a percentage of excise to say 5% of excise tax is going to go into stabilization? And the reason why I say that is because not only do I think this is a good idea that becomes good for the community and positive, a way to move forward, but I think if we come up with a sustainable way to keep funding it over time, we'll be able to reap the benefits of even small contributions over time. I don't know, just some thoughts, but I think that at least the creation of this and some discussion on how we can get some sustainable funding in it, I think is good to do.
I agree with you, Mike. Small numbers over time add up to positive change, big, better results or results.
I agree with you too, Mike. That's what excise tax is supposed to be used for.
The one thing I would just is, and again, this is town budgets, you get like addicted to stuff. The motor vehicle excise tax, which is, I believe, the biggest local receipt that we generate, but it's been geared towards the general fund budget. So if you take 10 grand from there, and again, it's not impossible to do. It can be done, but whatever amount you take from there, it will have an effect somewhere on the general fund budget, because that is, you have taxation, you have state aid, and local receipts. Basically, the three items that operate the town. So if you take some from excise, motor vehicle excise tax, and I believe a lot of people would probably support that, it's going to have a little bump on the general fund budget.
Yeah,
And
I understand that. I think that risk-wise, I think if we can come up with something that actually is manageable, you know, it's like Carter and Adam, when they do their disallows, they're trying to make our budget work. They're not doing it because it's fun to watch Chief Dickey squirm in his chair. They're doing it to balance the budget. It's a you know, we do our goals. We say what is our priorities in the latter half of the year. Those are decisions that are made very delicately. And that's why I would say if we were to have a sustainable source of income for a road stabilization fund, it would have to be made in a comfortable or risk would have to be measured when we did it. It would have to be 1.5%. I don't know. I don't have my budget book open to take a look at what revenues you could actually pull from there, but it would have to be something that would make sense. Kind of like the discussions when we sat on advisory board. It was like 0.75%, the algorithm to figure out what is going to make an appropriate emergency fund for the advisory board. I think this is one of those situations where you could apply that logic and actually have a steady, sustainable source of income and a plan for how to use it once it reaches a certain, you know, once it overlined with what our master plan would be for road infrastructure. Before we move on to anything, any other staff members, Bob May had asked some pretty straightforward questions. Would the money for this road stabilization fund ever find itself in the general fund, and how would you he said, how would you mandate it? Jeff, I think that question was to you.
It is a special stabilization fund, just like if you did an override, it's a special override. If you want, that's one avenue to continually fund it. And And the major thing is it's a 2/3 vote of town meeting to take it out. It's easy to get money in, but it's a little bit more work to get it out. And at this point in time, if you were going to try to take money out of a road stabilization fund to fund, the general fund, I don't think town meeting would go for it. I may be a little naive, maybe, you never know down the road. But one thing is for sure, if we don't create one and start it, we're going to be stuck where we are for a long time. If you look at the pavement study, I believe when it was first presented to the Board of Selectmen in 2017, the fall, I think in those dollars to fix all the roads in town was about $16 million. And if you look as it projects out, and that was done at that point in time. So I believe in 21, you're up around $19-20 million. But I don't know if they took into consideration inflation and increased costs and labor and all of those things. Of course, the price of oil, maybe the price of hot top and that stuff will go down some, but you don't know. But that's a lot of money in today's dollars to get all of our roads done, and it just keeps going up each year passes. So I don't know if that answers Bob's question or not, but one thing is for sure, if we do nothing, we stay pretty much where we are, because Chapter 90 money by itself is not going to get a one complete road done in 1 year, or even 2, maybe 3. Look at how much money it's costing to do Orchard Lane.
Mike, if I might.
Yes, Carter, please go ahead.
So the secret sauce to making sure that monies in a stabilization fund are used for the intent is in how the original language creating that fund is drafted. So if you say that the stabilization fund would be for road reconstructions or for drainage or whatever, when you go to withdraw that and you show the folks the appropriation item, it has to match the language. So there is some control there. Now, that's not to say that a subsequent meeting can't discontinue the fund, and that's another discussion. Jeff is correct that Chapter 90 money will not get you there. We've made some progress. Those of you who follow what we've been doing is I brought to Bob's attention 3 streets that had not been submitted to Chapter 90. And when he dug back through all the records, he actually found close to 15 streets that should increase our Chapter 90 account on the order of 10% plus or minus. Now, bear in mind that the gas tax, we have more fuel efficient vehicles and there's a dramatic quickening shift to electric vehicles. So the state is going to have to do something at some point. In terms of having a large scale sustainable revenue source, we've laid that out for you in the memorandum. There are 2 opportunities totaling $500,000 that would not require any increase in taxation that present themselves in 23 and 25. Our disagreement with Jeff is not over the fund. We agree with him completely. He's identified a very important issue. And when he speaks to the numbers in the pavement management study, we all need to remember that those are the hard costs of pavement. They do not include engineering, drainage, signage, and much of the related activities, which can add 20% to the cost of a project easily. So 2 things. 1, when to establish the stabilization fund. We think that it should be done as part of an overall approach so that you have an opportunity to have a conversation with the community about why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and what your timeline is to address the road issues in their community. I'm possibly the fall. I think it's a very fluid situation right now. How to start funding it? We frankly don't think now's the right time to be adjusting the overall formulas. But as we have found that the proceeds from the meals tax are going to exceed projections, Kelly and I have already been talking about that excess should be appropriated to the capital fund, the capital stabilization fund. As we get closer to our targets for the operations stabilization fund, we think there's an opportunity to modestly reduce that contribution. So we think that there's an opportunity to take the amount of monies being set aside in those three current reserves, the operations stabilization, the capital stabilization, and the OPEB, to create this additional stabilization account and simply tweak the contributions a bit, which allows you to move forward with the conversation, leaves the intent of the financial management policies, which are working, intact, and sets you up to have that larger discussion, positioning you for those possible sustainable contributions, but without tinkering with, well, we want to do 1.5% of this, or we want to do 2% of that, a whole other array of formulas. So if this is something that the board wants to proceed with, I think that we could get to work on it once we get past the current situation and have our FY 21 budget adopted and our town meeting concluded.
Yes.
Thank you, Carter.
Thank you, Jeff.
Would that be direction consensus then from the board to direct the staff working with Jeff and interested parties, whether we have it for the fall or the 2021 town meeting, a comprehensive strategy to create this fund, educate the public on it, and propose a funding mechanism?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, from me.
Yeah, sir. I definitely, I agree with Jeff. This is the kind of innovation, the kind of, you got to strike, into this and make it happen. So I'll say yes as well, but I'd really like to be able to look at this for fall.
I agree with timing is important.
I agree with the timing as well.
Then we will, upon the town meeting being concluded, we'll get to work on that.
Thank you again.
Thanks, Carter.
I was unmuted. Oops. Yeah, let's proceed on. So we're up to the Warrant article. I can bring that up. Carter, are you speaking to that piece?
I am, please.
Absolutely. Okay.
So this is the latest draft. It parallels to a great degree the draft contained in the presentation of February 27. Article 1 remains the same. This is some late bills. We have one vendor who's particularly problematic. Article 2 remains a little bit in flux. We do not have the latest snow and ice numbers as of the most recent storm. It was around $105,000 in deficit, but I don't have the numbers from last, I can't remember, Monday or Tuesday's storm. We have additionally had some real litigation coming out, not litigation, but legal expense coming out of COVID-19. You saw just one small snapshot view into some of that late this afternoon with the multiple policies and letters to the unions and the like. So that one remains in a bit of flux. Article 3, this last year when the meeting gave you authority to cut the budget, that negative vote was reported against the school district assessment, and it should have been reported against the town budget. So the Department of Revenue has required that we make this supplemental appropriation into the Narragansett Regional School District account to make that account whole. You have cut the district account or the departmental budgets, the general fund budgets. So this money's not actually being spent. It's to true up the difference in how we made that accounting report, and actually flows back into free cash next year. Article 4 is your consent agenda, having in it the annual report. If there's a committee that wants to present its report to the meeting, not just rely upon the printed, there is the change to the revolving funds, and Lori Weta spoke to the increase on the plumbing and gas and the electrical, which are outstripping the current activity. We pay them 80% of their permit fees, but not to exceed these numbers. But both the electrical and the plumbing and gas inspector have been working above and beyond. Now, the Community Services Fund is an outgrowth of the Westfield University study and the program put forth by the Recreation Commission. The new addition to the consent agenda this year is Article D. Rather than appropriating the first year it was $12.80, if I remember correctly. Last year it was $31. Rather than making that an appropriation, a separate freestanding article every fall, we propose to simply appropriate such sum of money as may be received. And so when the treasurer gets it, Kelly notes it, and then it's the account appropriation is increased by that receipt. It cleans things up a bit. Establishing the demand fee, this goes back to, I believe, 2008. The statute allows a demand fee much higher, up to $30. The current $10 fee is, I know this is a tough time to do it, but the current demand fee of $10 is not proving to be the incentive we would hope it would be. And so Cheryl is seeking an adjustment from the 2008 vote for $10 to be $15. If the board's concerned about that, we could certainly make it effective 1 year out or do something to provide a breathing space there. Article 6 is effectively what we showed you at February 27, with one exception. We have received 2 proposals to acquire the Baldwinville Elementary School. They have not yet been screened. That will happen in the next 2 weeks, and then or 3 weeks. One of the proposers is requesting a bit more of parcel 407. I don't know which of these proposers will be recommended. And then there's also always the possibility, as unfortunately happened the last time around, that the designated developer drops out. Rather than having to go back a second time and cause delays to anyone's schedule, any developer's schedule, the decision was made to seek authority for this larger piece of land. If you can see 382, that parcel there, the original proposal had been to come from the southeast corner of 382 back towards parcel 389. So it's this extra portion of parcel 407 that their proposal calls for, and we're simply trying to true up the request to the town meeting to give the board the flexibility to go either way. Article 7, there's a duplicate that was left in the codification that was found. There's going to be some of those that come along. Jeff found a statute that had been adopted that wasn't in the codification, and that's gone off to the town clerk. Article 8 simply cleans up again, now that they've actually been adopted, to clean up the language a little bit. The other thing that Article 8 does is it eliminates the requirement that every 5 years you print all of the general bylaws in a booklet form. Well, in 1951, this was probably a dozen sheets of 8.5 by 11 that you could print and fold and staple. And today it's with zoning and multiple other amendments, it's 300 plus pages. It's now also searchable online. The 300 pages available at the library, at the town clerks and the like. So we're seeking to eliminate this requirement that it be published in booklet form. Article 9 and 10, I've spoken to. This is a trend across the state. There are now approximately 90 communities as of the last report that I saw, where the Board of Selectmen is now referred to as the Select Board. We are asking you to do the same, make the same request of the town meeting. We think it reflects the time. We think it reflects diversity. We think it reflects progressivity, which would be of some note to grant agencies, financial institutions, and others. Article 11 is, with one exception, agreed language. This goes back well over 2 years. The select board had proposed some amendments to the advisory committee. Those were put on hold. It went back and forth, quite a bit. The only difference between the final versions and the advisory committee now remains on, let me just see if I can find that yellow highlight. Yes, Mike, in section 9-4, it's the top of page 8 in the yellow highlight. The advisory committee had requested that the current drop dead, if you will, for the select board to deliver the warrant is April 10. The advisory committee had suggested pushing that back to April 8. The reason it was April 10, this was a change in bylaw a number of years ago. Jeff might even recall when that happened. But we have been truly blessed by a very good working relationship with the regional school district. And even Monty Tech these past 2 years. By statute, they do not have to deliver a budget until March 31. They don't have to give you a draft budget. They don't have to give you any indications of where it's headed. They don't have to have any conversations with you. Now, when I say truly blessed, because by February, we've known where both boards were headed. And had it not been for the pandemic, we would have had a final budget from the school committee 2 weeks ago. Those good luck, those turns of good fortune can evaporate overnight, and a future school board could revert to handing you a budget on March 31. Should that happen, we think that having this at April 10th instead of April 8th, just those 2 extra days, could be extremely important in trying to make adjustments to the town budget so that it balances. Because it's our responsibility in presenting the warrant to the advisory committee to have a balanced budget. And so I believe, and hopefully Tony's still online, that is now the only differing point of view. Article 12 was from Jeff, and frankly, we are supportive of his request. Article 13, I think, explains itself. Article 14 operates off of revenues and retained earnings. One of the reasons that we are so driven to try to get to a town meeting by June 30 is so that there's no confusion over free cash, retained earnings. I know the legislation says we can go back to June 30, but the sooner we can get to a budget, allocate our free cash and retained earnings, and close our books, the sooner we can get to audit, and it's going to be challenging, the sooner we can make those fall appropriations. Article 15 is the distribution of CPC monies. Those all go into various pots of money for future appropriation. Article 16 is one of those typical future appropriations. In this instance, the CPC has supported our request for $17,500 to undertake all the elements that we need to develop an affordable housing trust, which would allow us to tap future CPC monies on a revolving fund basis. It would allow us to retain the consultant to develop the lottery program that we've talked about. The idea being that when day mail or other properties become available, the select board could exercise its right of first refusal through the use of these monies that would be on deposit with the housing trust. That property would be lotteried off, put back into the hands of someone income eligible, and the proceeds would go back into that revolving fund. You can't do that kind of program without an affordable housing trust. The other part of this is for council to really do a deep dive into the planning, the zoning bylaws, and to make sure that we have not only limited barriers for the development of affordable housing, but we perhaps have regulations which are supportive of, whether it's in-law apartments, okay, great, but what do you do when that blood relative is no longer alive? Can that then be used for student or for over 55? How can we encourage people to develop that kind of in-law apartment and say to them, yes, and it can continue on under these circumstances, so we can try to see more of that develop. This has been presented to the planning board as well. I don't know, I think Jeff may have been there that night. I might not be recollecting correctly, but I know that he has spoken to at least one body, if not more, on what we're trying to do, and those boards were supportive when he spoke. 17, 18 are standing accounts. Article 19 is to set the salary of elected town officials. This is something that we believe is required to conform to statute on the general fund side of the house, and that we brought to you with our first annual town meeting. Okay, hearing no questions on that, then I'll keep moving on. Article 20 would be fleshed out with the department by department budget. It's yellows just in case there are any changes folks made tonight. Article 21 is the capital budget. There is more capital being expended, about another $100,000 or so, but that's over in the light department in some other accounts. And I think you've gone through every department with that. Royalston Road title work, the idea would be to do all the title work now, determine if there are title problems that need to be resolved. Once we have the title work done, then we try to get any of those issues cleaned up. We finalize design. Once we have final design, then we would seek the money to appraise the properties. A lot of these acquisitions are really, they're drainage easements and construction easements. I don't believe that there's any, there might be one or two small in-fee property acquisitions. And the department heads, I believe, have each spoken to their needs there. Article 22 is a little bit unique. We split it apart and made it completely separate. The actual cost to buy the rubber tired backhoe is in the $122,500 range. Initially, we were offered $85,000 in trade-in for the excavator. Now, the way we do this is when we put the equipment out to bid to buy it, we also say, and tell us what you will give us in terms of trade-in. But at the same time, we put the equipment out for bids on the open market of how much will you pay us to buy it. So this article was worded such that if the better price is the trade-in price, that's exactly what we would do. We would trade it in and then spend up to $37,500 of free cash. If the purchase or the proposal from an independent person is, well, yeah, but we'll pay you $100,000, then we could use $85,000 of that 100,000 plus the 37.5 that's been appropriated, and the delta, the extra 15,000 we're making by selling the piece of equipment instead of trading it in, goes to the miscellaneous revenues and then rolls into free cash. Now, because of the costs of this and it being in excess of $10,000, we were able to get both pieces of equipment appraised. The advisory committee helped us out with a small transfer there to pay the cost of the appraisal. So whichever way we go, in disposing of it in either direction, we will be fully 30B compliant. Article 23, you had your presentation for Monty Tech. That went down a little bit. Those dollars helped us assist the Narragansett Regional School above our target 2.5%. By using the decline on the Monty Tech and reducing the overlay set aside a little bit, we've been able to manage that within budget, and the overlay reserve, what we're setting aside to put into that, remains within your financial management policies. Article 25 will be taken off. As of today, we have no amendments, and we will not be getting any in time for this town meeting. So 26, 27, and so forth will come down by one number. 26, 27, 20 are petition warrant articles. 28 is a petition warrant article to establish a quorum. I want to speak to this one very briefly. The requirement that is proposed would call for roughly 1,300 voters to come to a town meeting. That is simply, while we would all love to have more people attend town meeting and be educated on them and participate in them, the idea that 1,300 people are going to come to the town meeting when generally for local elections, you're in the low teens, 13%, 14%, 15% turnout, is simply not realistic. My greater concern is that any quorum becomes difficult to manage. I've been in communities that have 12,000 people and a quorum of 100. And they don't get a quorum. And everybody sits there for 45 minutes or 70 minutes as everybody's on their phones trying to call people to get them to come to the town meeting. And folks come and there's a quorum and the meeting gets started. And then somebody questions the quorum. And a lot of the folks that came to humor you with your call have left and the meeting has to shut down. And decisions are made by those that attend the meetings. And yours has had attendance as low as 23. And we'll get you that report between now and as it gets closer to town meeting time. So with the deletion of the NRSD placeholder, the renumbering, some final wordsmithing, and the insertion of the budget, the only item that should remain open by the time this gets to you is Article 3 to reflect the actual snow and ice deficit. And so far, with one possible exception, it looks like we are going to be able to handle all of the costs out of the COVID-19 event out of our operating budget or within a transfer from the reserve fund. That exception that I'll bring to your attention is we have been working with the town clerk to determine what we can do to improve turnout at the election, to improve the vote count, given what will most likely be some still very lingering concerns over COVID-19. You must have your election by June 30. There's no extending into fiscal 21, at least under the current legislation. So the town clerk's been looking at all kinds of things. Early voting, mailing an early voting ballot to everybody in town. Extra disinfections, and we're working on that memo now and have something for you, and then possibly some few added dollars for legal, as I said earlier, you saw some of that work today, but we will do our very best to make sure that it fits within that 140,000 in change. We're not looking to change the bottom line number at all. We're thinking that we might be able to accomplish it once we have the final snow and ice deficit. So those, that's everything that I have. And based upon what I heard earlier tonight, we would get this off to town council in the next few days. Give him a little extra time with it and have it on your agenda of 22 April for a final vote, which would allow it to be transmitted to as a final signed copy, allow it to be transmitted to the advisory committee with upwards of 60 days for review and in pre-town meeting. But as Tony requested earlier, they will still have had it for a substantial period of time. So happy to answer any questions. But that is where we are at as of today on this draft warrant.
Thank you, Carter.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Carter.
Carter. One question. So we have to allow that everything on the draft warrant, including citizens petitions?
Yes, citizen petitions go on the warrant at the very end in the order in which they were received. That way, there can't be any question of why did you put this here or there. That's the same practice we've been following since I've been with you, and it's codified in your operating procedures. And we put the citizens petition on the warrant exactly as it is submitted. I know some councils think you can make minor tinkering for spelling or the like. It's been our practice in my time with you to type it out exactly as it's received.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing nothing more for the warrant, the calendar year, okay. Okay, the items that we have left for our workshop this evening are referrals from earlier meetings on Scout Hall and moving the Veterans Park. Starting off with Scout Hall, Jeff, I had some notes on it. I know that you've been bringing some prep material to meetings. Do you want to kick off the discussion on that, or do you want me to frame it?
Yes. Well, since we've, the Scout Hall Reuse Committee has been dissolved, and there was funding in place, the question to be answered, I believe, is the use for the hall and how will we proceed with any work or construction on it to align ourselves with 30B, so we don't have the Inspector General coming back to the town. And I know one of the, for me anyway, one of the main points of Scout Hall as far as use is cable TV, TCTV, working out of a closet and a trunk, and that old building over in Baldwinville. They have certainly demonstrated the need, as well as I know in his budget presentation on Saturday, the need for a new server to set up studio time. And hopefully when this COVID Corona stuff is all over with, we continue Facebook Live and things like that. Also, at one point, a meeting, I believe I mentioned that perhaps Scout Hall would be a good landing point for the Recreation Commission, not so much for sign up and things. I think if that works out at the senior center, but for their records and keeping and doing the stuff internally that they might do, would be Scout Hall would be a good location for that. This project really falls on the Board of Selectmen overseeing it and voting on things are we going to have Bob Sozik through Building and Grounds do the legwork or the oversight, or not the oversight, but as far as any more construction or renovations on the building to do, as well as the upkeep? That's a conversation I think that the board needs to have, and we really haven't had it. We've talked about, doing this or that or meeting at some point in time. So from my point of view, those are the things that, the board needs to kind of decide on. And if you go back to when the committee was created back in 2016, and if you look at minutes from CPC, they are very strong supporters, CPC, of funding the rehabilitation of that town-owned building with the intent that TCTV would be in it because of parking and the size of the building and the location. There's not much use. And the parking is the biggest thing on that building, as far as, a lot of public events or anything like that. Dare I say, unless the town, bought the church next door and, for parking. But as it sits right now, a definite planned use of the building, because I don't think there really is a voted on plan by the Board of Selectmen yet. I may be wrong in that, but I haven't come across anything. I know there is thoughts on an outline, this and this would be in there, but I don't believe I'm not aware if there was ever a formal vote by the Board of Selectmen to, yes, TCTV, yes, Rec Commission, and perhaps have those two groups come before the board at some point in time in the future. Because there is money sitting there from back in 2016, there's a little bit of money left over. So I think it's there was about 11,000, and then a recent 50,000, another big chunk of money for renovations, completion of work at Scout Hall that needs to be dealt with.
Thanks, Jeff. I've got a couple of things. I took down some notes. I tend to agree with you. I know that I've gone back and forth thinking through, what it should be. Should we shed the property? All these different things. But what I've come up with, and I just have a quick bulleted list that I'm going through. I'm very interested to know what the punch list is. What left has to be done. So whether it's us or the public to understand, is there still an outstanding, every building requires maintenance. I get that. But from the original outset of this building, what left needs to be done? And then do we have the resources to do it? The second thing, I agree with you, Jeff. I think that there needs to be some kind of delegation of custodianship to basically make Bob Skozik the custodian, and instead of the Board of Selectmen, a committee, the TA or otherwise, to put someone in charge of that, to have custodianship for oversight for the punch list, renovations, anything that we just determine. Then the next thing is budget considerations. Not only what money do we have or is needed to bring that building to the condition that we have expectations for? But what is the planned, if, depending on whatever the planned use is there money available to make sure that we can sustain the property for whatever we deem fit for it? Next item is use documentation. If it was a gift, what was the intent? Are we following the expectation of why we have the building, where it sits, parking spaces, all these different things to make sure that we've got a common frame of guidance through this. Having said all that, and based on my time on this board, my proposal would be to convert it into a community services building. Have it be a hub for TCTV, recreation, any community-based organizations like Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. I can't picture the layout in my head. That's why I think that we need to really understand and have some sketch work going through it. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to me as a department-wise to basically say this should be a community services building. This should be a property that is a benefit to the community, which I think really ties into the original intent of the gift of this building. And I think it'll actually be very useful, especially since community services has been so active with our reaction to the current crisis. Having said that, I think there are two things that we need to do, Jeff, in response to what you were saying. We need a way forward. We have to come up with how do we get there, whether it's someone designated on this board to come up with a sketch, whether we delegate someone else, whether it's, again, Bob Skozik, the town administrator, the assistant town administrator, community services, now that I've kind of put an overarching aspect to it. And then just quite simply, whoever has access to it, let's plan on having some kind of tour. So the Board of Selectmen understands what is possible, what is within the realm of possibilities if we are to consider this for a community services building. That's all I have.
Mike, if I might. It was the turn of the century, 1900s, Sullivan, who said form follows function. And I think all those things that you've laid out need to be done. But those are relatively easy pieces. The decision is, what activities do you want to occur in that building? What is the program going to be for the building? We have received permission, and Jackie, in fact, spoke with me yesterday about exactly which office. She's going to have office space at the senior center, as is the recreation department. So I would suggest that step one is settling upon how you want to get to what is the program for the building going to be. Once we know that, Bob Sosik is in charge of all the buildings. He has a knowledge of this building. He's solicited a number of quotes. He can then take that program and obtain the quotes that are needed to implement that program. And there are no use restrictions on the property, by the way. We've been through the deed. There was an early use restriction when it was being leased to the town for educational purposes. But once the town acquired it, there's no use restrictions on it. So I guess my question is, if having Bob Sosik is agreeable to the board in terms of developing those cost estimates to put the building into a condition where it could support the proposed uses, how does the board wish to get to a program statement? Because Jeff is correct. there was conversation of, it should be for this, it should be for that. Maybe it'll be this, maybe it'll be that. Maybe TCTV should be there in some different iterations. But I really think that that's question number one. Before, frankly, you can even start developing cost estimates or doing anything else.
Steve, I see you have your hand up, but I want to give the rest of the board a chance.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead, Diane.
So my concern is, it used to be, I mean, it was called Scout Hall because the scouts used to be there. And my concern is parking. There's not enough parking. They were parked all over the place, and we can't really use the parking over at Antiquities because it's not our lot, and we can't invade on their space. So I don't know how many parking spaces are over there. Do you know the answer to that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
right off the top of my head, I believe Scout Hall has 2 for that. And there's also a war monument there where there used to be the tree for the Christmas stuff. There are, according to a building study, and I can bring this to whenever we get to a meeting, and I can look it up after this. There are 2 or 3 parking spots, and one is supposed to be designated handicap to visit that monument that is there. At least
Right.
that's in an old study of all town buildings paid for by the light department, done back in 2004.
I agree that it should be a community services building. I agree that TCTV should be there. I think that TCTV started the whole project. And I also agree in sustainability. I mean, can we sustain that building? I mean, it's not just about what we want it to be. Can we sustain, heat, electricity, but I mean, if everybody has an office to go to, I mean, I think TCTV has a grand scheme for that building. They've proven that they want it. They've proven that they can do stuff with it. It's a good sized building. I don't know what changes have been made on the inside. I think we should take a tour. I mean, but we do have to decide what we will do with that building.
Terry, do you have
I'm
any?
listening, yep, I'm listening, and I agree with Diane. TCTV got the ball rolling. I've looked at the plans and the upkeep, the fact that they can include in their budget the bills that will come their way when they inhabit that building. So I'd also like to hear from Steve if that's allowed, but I'm all for TCT having it. I'd like to go through a walkthrough of it. And I do believe that Steve would be fair and share his building. And there's a lot of good things that will come of it.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to give the board the chance to give their overview first. Steve has used the raise hand feature. Thank you very much, Steve. You may go.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all, and thank you for your support. I believe, before I forget, somebody told me there were 7 parking spaces there. I know there are several right by the curb, by the island, and there's at least another 2 right in front of the building. I can't quite remember where that information came from, but I just thought you should know that. And I would fully support it being used by all of community services, including TCTV, and have had a similar thought in that vein. And, we've always gone into this project with something like that in mind, that it would be a shared resource. We don't want it all to ourselves, and we want to be in a community center like that to meet our clients and others. And I think we can do a lot of service for the town and some small businesses that need media services as well. And again, I'll say that's a part of economic development that I think we should focus on growing. So thank you for your support in this, and we're happy to work with everybody on that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Diane.
I haven't really thought about that, but economic development is something that we need to really grow.
Yes, and we're working on that. We haven't had Economic Development Committee hasn't met because of the current crisis, but I agree.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Jeff.
I'm looking at the monthly expenditure report, the last one that we received, dated 3/9/2020. And it shows a total of $61,140 available that was designated for Scout Hall from the Community Preservation Fund. So that's should be the amount of money sitting there for whatever work needed to complete that building right now.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Diane.
I think a punch list, like what you said, was my thought as well. It would be a good idea if something like that could be submitted to the board.
Who's responsible for submitting it? Is it up to us to go in, or is it Bob Sozik, or does Steve have an idea? Who submits the punch list of where we go from here? How do we pick up the pieces and roll with it?
So Carter kind of outlined it by basically saying, decide what you want to do with it, and then point your finger at and appoint Mr. Skozik to try and then get some cost estimates and otherwise to get to that point. Steve, you wish to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I may be able to help you from what I know with what I think is left to do. I think that they have to, but the last time I saw it was back in the spring, last spring. So May or June, I think, when it was being painted. And I believe that we wanted to have the floors resurfaced, sanded and refinished, the hardwood floors. And the electrical needs to be done. And I'm not really sure if there's anything beyond that construction wise. Bathroom and the kitchen have to be rebuilt. So any kind of cabinetry, you know, if we want built-ins around there, would have to be done as well. And also there is a floor plan that we were working on that I had drawn up that may accommodate all of community services in the way that you had in mind as well. And that's in a file.
Yeah, Steve, it would be helpful, I think, from a floor plan, if you're able to share that. It would be interesting to see what the layout is. Adam, you had something?
Yeah, if I'm interpreting this discussion going on with the Board of Selectmen right now, I just want to, for clarification purposes, because Carter and we'll have to sit down and make sure that everything's working out appropriately. But if I understand this correctly, Jackie with Community Services will be in charge of the operations, and Bob Sozik will be in charge of the maintenance and the upkeep of the buildings. Is that correct? I just want clarification.
Well, I made a recommendation that it be a community services building. I mentioned Jackie because that's her department. It seemed like a lot of those community services that especially that have plugins to community-based organizations, it just seemed like the right kind of fit for what we needed. And I understand that there's been moving all over the place. Like, you know, Mr. Dill's on the line with us. You know, we're trying to find him office space and otherwise. It just, as I tried to think through community services without some kind of, they have the library, they have senior center, I get that. But as we keep saying to people, they're the face of how we administer our resources to the community. And I don't necessarily putting her in charge of it, but I am saying the majority of her department may be affected by that in terms of capability. I'm certainly not appointing at all, or would make a recommendation to do
Yeah, I
Mr.
mean,
Chair.
if Carter, do you want to take it from here? I just want a clarification, that's all.
Well, again, I think step one is, what do you want to have go in there? To say, well, Jackie will be in charge and it'll be all community services, if that's what you want, fine, but we haven't even involved Jackie in that discussion. I mean.
that. I know it's a workshop.
However you're going to get to that decision, I think that you need to settle upon a small group of people that can have that conversation, because that program will drive what you need to do to finish the building. It's more than a punch list. There's $60,000+ left to spend, and it was believed that you actually still needed to spend $60,000. So I don't know how the board wants to get to that decision as to what the program is going to be in a way that involves potential users, involves board members. I don't know what approach you want to use to get there. That will then drive everything else.
I would want to have from a community service perspective, I would definitely like to hear Jackie's perspective, working with her team to say, I know we need capability. We know that we have an idea for TCTV for recreation, not for people, I mentioned the community-based organizations like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. I get it that there's a parking restriction there, but I'm thinking very, very targeted for Jackie and her team to say, if we were to allocate this building resource to you, how best can it meet the needs of your department? She could come back and say, I want Steve Castle to have the whole thing. Or she could say, you know what? I want to give Steve this because he says this is what he can operate with and it's going to meet what he needs. Scott Dill may come in here and say, I'd like to have some kind of a meeting area. I don't know. I don't know what the 100% of what they need is, but that's the conversation that I think that I'd like to see happen based on my proposal, that I think community services would benefit the most from allocating it to them. And then from there, we can go to Bob and say, all right, this is what we'd like to go in there. And here is what it might look like. I think we could have movement within the next year or two, if that was the case.
Then, Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if the board would consider designating Jackie to lead a review of potential uses for the building, including the various members of her department, perhaps even a community survey of organizations ranging from nonprofits, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, and the like, and report back to this board with a final report on programmatic uses by May 30. Then the board could say yes, no, maybe, and I only say May 30 because the current situation poses a tour of the building, conversations with people. Everything is just taking more time than it would in the norm, especially as we head into Scott's group trying to ramp up his summer camp, and we're trying to deal with everything that we're dealing. That would then at some point in June, this board, or July, the new board, could vote upon the program, and we could have Bob obtain the needed cost estimates to implement that program and report back to the board late summer, and the work could probably be completed by January 1, assuming we can get contractors, which I suspect they may actually be freed up by the current events, because some of that ongoing business that has kept them from bidding on our projects. will have
So
dried.
Carter, if I can cut in, because it's like a Jerry Maguire kind of moment. You had me at hello. I very much like what you proposed there. I think it's exciting for them to be able to meet like that, to basically say, hey, they're thinking of us. Let's come up with that proposal, a survey or otherwise. I love to get a thumbs up, thumbs down sense from the rest of the board. The one thing that I would add on to it, I'm wondering if there's some things that Bob could do concurrently to that process because it affected the overall use of the building, understanding that we're trying to make a decision to say, we want to move forward with the use of this building. We'll figure it out. But if life, health, or safety item needs to get fixed on that, let's not wait for how we're going to use it if it's a general repair item. Over.
We can certainly discuss that with them. And no expenditures would be made without bringing an expenditure plan in front of the board for
Understood.
approval.
Understood.
So I agree with Mike.
I agree.
I agree. I was wondering if it needed to be winterized until it's finished or how that is working out.
No, it's being heated to a holding temperature. It's fine for the moment. It has some issues I would let Bob address, but it's sounding to me, Mr. Chairman, like this is ripe for action on 8 April with a motion to instruct the community services team to report back with a program after consulting with its units, community organizations, and the community at large, and to report back to the select board by June 1.
I agree.
So to clarify, that includes Steve, Jackie, so Steve would continue to have a say. I just want clarification, and that would include Scott and all that comes under Jackie's jurisdiction.
Yes, all of the units that are under the Office of Community Services would be part of that discussion. I would encourage Jackie to undertake a community survey as well, to cast a wide net and to report back on all uses that were considered, those that were discounted, those that are recommended, and the whys and wherefores thereof.
But we haven't asked her yet.
You
I'm
haven't,
smiling here because that's a lot. She's got a lot.
She does have a lot, but you know, she can delegate as well. She's got a team that she can work with. I don't expect her to stop everything that she's doing, develop PowerPoints and, you know, buy a nice suit and get ready for a presentation. But to know that we're asking her and her department for recommendations, you know, we're anointing them to say, we think it can best serve you. They could come back. I find it very hard to believe that they come back and they say, nah, forget it. We can't use it. But for them to take some kind of approach to say, yeah, here's our ideas. What do you think? I think is a good thing.
Mr. Chairman, based upon Terry's concerns, Scott's trying to get his summer camp off the ground, so he'll be doing interviews and the like. I would respectfully request that the board consider giving 90 days to Jackie to get this task done, which would mean the report would be made to the new board. And so we wouldn't have to refresh the discussion on it. And it would give Scott a little more time to concentrate on his priority. And I think that although it's an extra 30 days, the timelines might line up a little bit better given everything else that's going on.
Agreed. Scott, you've been quite quiet over there.
Just taking it all in. I agree with the group that we need to see the building. I have never been in that building in my time. I don't know what the floor plan looks like. I don't know what Steve's plan is. It is a big task for Jackie, but she has a great team under her. And I think if she gets together with all of us and we collaborate on what we need to do and what we want to do with that building, and, you know, like Carter said, throw the net wide and capture other groups, I think it'll work. But we've got to take our time. We don't want to rush into this, and we want to have the right plan in place before we make a move. But a community center is definitely, community services center is definitely a, you know, it's right near town hall. What a better spot to have a community center is right there.
Agreed.
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 All right, going by our operating procedures, I can see that we're coming up on our basically a 15-minute warning for a 3.5-hour meeting. We can, Jeff, you were quiet about the Scout Hall thing. I can take your silence as that you agreed to move forward with the way that Carter explained it.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
I was looking through the book that I have on, and that little monument park in front of Scout Hall is actually Amended Park, and it lists 3 temporary spaces, I guess, that you could use when you're visiting along the curb. And it seems to indicate there is 8 spots for Scout Hall. I'd have to read through the book a little bit more and stuff, but that's what I found in the last 5 or 10 minutes.
So Jeff, I thought there was 2 spots and a handicap spot, but you're saying that there's temporary spots? If I could just chime in, Mr. Chairman.
That's what this study did with all the town-owned land and buildings and stuff. And that little park right there, the monument, that island, it lists that's Amended Park. I guess there's a plaque there to a veteran, and it lists 3 temporary spots along the curb inside.
Oh, around the curb. Okay, because it's pretty tight in that section.
Yeah, on the inside, and then Scout Hall, it lists parking spaces along the curb and a couple up in front of Scout Hall. Again, I can bring it in and you can dig through it, look through it as you want. And what might be actually on the land plot from the assessor's office, I don't know if it, you know, jives with this or not. It should, but again, this was done 2004.
So you got the information. Yeah, if you could just swing by and I could just do some research on it, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I could drop that book off tomorrow if you're in the office.
Yeah, I'll be there. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay.
Okay, the only thing that we have on our workshop agenda this evening is the move of Veterans Park. I'll just give a real quick, let's see, the move of Veterans Park. Our stakeholders right now, as I understand it, is the community who brought forth this action. I don't have the gentleman's name in front of me right now, sorry. Sheila Pelletier of VSO, CPC, John Henshaw. I believe Chief Dickey somehow jumped on board with this. I saw a meeting that we had canceled to discuss this. So there's a delay in that. I believe we've got to the point where there's consensus to move from Elm Street location in Baldwinville to Main Street in Baldwinville, or I think people are referring, I look up at the address and it says Main Street, Baldwinville, but I think people are referring it to right on the edge of Otter River. We can discuss a few way forward, or we can table this to the next workshop. I don't think it would be a bad thing to table it to the next workshop, looking at the time that we have left, and just that quick update for where we're at. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, the location in Baldwinville is actually 4 Elm Street. And just for the information, they're under the CPC funding schedule. there is $37,554 left. There was an original amount, I think it was like 45,000 or so, that was designated to tear down the old building that was there. It was the old office of the town clerk. It had been a town hall at one point in time. But that amount of money was came from CPC to tear down that building and then contribute towards building the Veterans Park there. So not only moving the park, but there would be an issue of the CPC funds that are sitting still on the books as to how you would handle those. I mean, I don't want to leave 37,000 just sitting on the books for, forever. I'm not sure the procedure, what CPC would have to say about, or the state law as far as using those funds off the top of my head, but.
Yeah, good point. And that's why we were going to have a meeting between Sheila and Mr. Henshaw to discuss those things, to figure out a way forward with that. That meeting never occurred based on just everything that had been happening. We can do that meeting again, or we can gain some kind of understanding of the discussion that still needs to be had. But that's probably one of the primary things is, can you do it?
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Please.
you would be best served by developing the sketch plan of what you want to do in Otter River, making sure that that comports with other uses of the park, so that you have the support of the cemetery and park commissioners, and then having some specificity to discuss with the CPC. You could then have that discussion. I think that if you were to try to have the discussion ahead of time without being able to explain in a little bit of detail what you want to do, the reaction might be, well, we're not quite sure if that fits. We need to think about this. We need to think about that. So develop the sketch plan with the intent of continuing to use CPC monies. Have that discussion with CPC to get their blessings. And then you could do one of two things. You would make a new appropriation from the CPC, and the one that was on the books would get folded back into the CPC's reserves, or you would amend the warrant article to allow for this new use. You should probably, if you're going to move it, you be prepared also for a discussion with the CPC of, well, okay, folks, but we gave you money to tear down Town Hall to make a park, not just to tear down Town Hall. How are you going to make us whole on that side? So my suggestion is that you really think through the questions CPC might have and be prepared to answer those before going in there, so that they can respond in some detail. And then the question will come up with, okay, so what are you going to do with the land? One possibility is to inquire of the Army Corps if they're interested in it, because they have all the land to the rear and they would be fairly good stewards of it.
All right, so our next workshop is May 6th. What I would ask the rest of the board, let's table this until the next workshop, May 6th. We'll bring in Mr. Henshaw and any other invitees to have that discussion. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me. And I believe it was Mike Evard was the another spokesperson with Jim Brio, and Chief Dickey's involvement was because the playground adjacent to the site in Otter River is in memorial of a former
Okay.
fire.
Understood. Now I remember now.
So yeah, table 9:30ish, I think it is. Not 10 o'clock. Oh my God. All right. That's it. I'm out. Table. I'm
Mike,
still here, but I'm muted.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead.
I did attend a CPC meeting, their last meeting, and that came up, Veterans Park. And they are suggesting that we umbrella with open space and recreation to do the project as a whole, redo the entire park, not just, they'd rather fund an entire project under open space and recreation, and they can umbrella that Veterans Park in with open space and recreation to fix the memorial, fix the playground, fix the fields, and build a Veterans Park all into one CPC lump fund.
How exciting is that? Woohoo! I like
But
that.
there's a huge plan. They need a total site plan. There's a lot, this is the tip of the iceberg, but the funding will be as an umbrella to all. And that park will sit as a community park.
I'm so smiling right now.
But they were very optimistic, and that was their goal, is to bring it under one umbrella.
Okay.
Spend the money in one shot instead of us going back in a year saying, hey, we want to fix that park because we had a dilapidated playground, a dilapidated field, and a dilapidated parking lot with a beautiful Veterans Park. So we want to do it all at once and open it as one shot.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the overhead you can see right now, and it looks pretty rough.
It's rough. It's very rough.
Last time I was at the playground, we were attacked by yellow jackets. And I don't know if I would meet with Chief Dickey, but I was at a playground down in Connecticut that was actually like an interactive playground that you could take the kids through with your cell phones. It was more than just a playground. I have pictures of it, and it was phenomenal, very modern.
But CPC was very, very excited that I attended, and, want to wrap this as one project, not two separate projects, and do it the right way the first time. And they would fund it, and it would be a huge undertaking, but it would be a beautiful park for the veterans and the youth of the community.
Thank you for the update, Scott. I appreciate it. I forgot about that we were on live stream. I know we're looking on time. We're pretty much already done, but I can tell you Jackie is watching at home. She very much agrees with Scott on the Scout Hall stuff. She's happy to work on it. Couple of other citizens, Amanda, we're on a committee together. She thinks it's a great community gathering spot. Bob May loves the TCTV aspect of it. And let's see, Amanda was talking about moving the Veterans Park and putting the skate park in Baldwinville Center. That's one of the comments on there. For the rest of the board, do we want to, we'll continue to work on it, but can we chair this to the next, I'm sorry, not chair it, table it. I got my furniture items wrong. Can we table this to our May 6th? I think I need one of the things that I know Jeff's going to drink at the end of this meeting. Can we table it to May 6th?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, in the words of Jean-Luc Picard, number one, make it so.
You'll never get any complaints with Star Trek references from me. Anything else before I look for a motion to adjourn? All right, there he is. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor of adjourning, signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Okay, this meeting is, oh wait, where's my camera? Here we go. Adjourned.